Thank you. This is systemic reaction to cobalt from hip implants. I've had a lot to do with the recommendation for that. I was the first case report, and I authored the case report with a single solitary other patient that I implanted an ASR hip. And the news to the panel is this is a common problem. Since I got my ASR hip in 2006, I've been systematically studying the problem in myself and in my patients. And this today is a report of where I am now in my knowledge, having systematically studied the problem for 4.5 years, with screening all of my patients with any cobalt chrome implant with a urine cobalt level, a symptom inventory done at the same time, combined with my experience as a revision surgeon. This particular slide that was just up there showed a woman with a pure immune initial presentation. Arthroprosthetic cobaltism presents with nonspecific general and neurologic symptoms, and then it progresses to hard neurologic findings and symptoms, and is also associated with new immune and cardiovascular diagnosis. And I know this from study of nearly 300 of my own patients in systematic fashion. For our study, we defined our at-risk population as any patient with a cobalt chrome implant. So in my case, I'm a revision hip surgeon, knee surgeon, shoulder surgeon, so these are all hip, knee, and shoulder patients. We screened 241 patients, of which 139 were P and cobalt level greater than 1 part per billion. We considered those patients to be cobalt positive, the other patients to be cobalt negative for the sake of our statistical analysis. And what we find is significantly statistical, usually at a p-value of 0.0001 in terms of the constitutional symptoms, the hard neurologic symptoms, also similar level of statistical correlation. Also, new immune diagnosis, new cardiovascular diagnosis. This is not a metal-on-metal problem. This is a problem any hip, knee, shoulder with a chrome cobalt implant. The red squares are my metal-on-metals. There's only 37. You'll notice there's a huge overlap between the red data points and my blue data points, which are largely metal-on-plastic hips. These are with the metal-on-metals excluded, which show the blue diamonds are the better performing modular implants with well-designed tapers, some of them out many years without elevated cobalt levels. So in terms of tapers, this is a design issue. Some implants rarely corrode in my experience, and others corrode commonly. Most significantly, the most common symptoms are neurologically related and are constitutional. And over the past 4.5 years, we've learned that FDG PET brain scanning is specific and sensitive to diagnosing cobalt, arthroplasty cobalt encephalopathy. And we're now up to about 80 patients where we have confirmed the diagnosis of cobalt encephalopathy with FDG PET brain scan, which has a specific pattern of focal brain hypometabolism. There appears to be a sorting of patients into sensitive, more and less sensitive groups, at least 3 of them. This is well studied by the Italians and is likely related to differential albumin binding of cobalt in the sera. This is what our more visual interpretation of the FDG PET brain scans look like. This is a normalized quantitative study that divides the brain into 241 discrete regions and assigns a t-score to each area. It's absolutely quantitative, there's no interpretation, and every patient we've scanned with elevated urine cobalt levels and symptoms has had a statistically abnormal brain scan with the same pattern of abnormalities. Since we've been going at this for 4.5 years, we're probably now up to 20 patients. Well, we're up to probably 40 patients revised for a combination of systemic and local periprosthetic issues. And what we see generally is reversibility. We remove the cobalt, urine and blood cobalts resolve to normal, and most all patients have had significant resolution of both systemic and periprosthetic symptoms. Some of these patients have been gravely ill and lost their livelihoods. That last slide was a bush pilot that developed severe Parkinson's disease, which reversed when we revised both his metal-on-metal hips. This is a nurse with a metal-on-metal hip. She lost her job because she developed a tremor. She couldn't start IVs. She was seeing her surgeon twice a week, but her hip didn't hurt her. It was only when she came into the office later complaining of back pain that PA checked the cobalt level, because I was in the clinic and was preaching that metal-on-metal hips ought to have the cobalt level checked. This is not just a metal-on-metal problem. This is a modular chrome cobalt neck stem implant, more elderly patient. What I'm finding is my corrosion-generated cobalt patients get sicker with lower cobalt levels. We know this at the local periprosthetic level from Dr. Kwan's work, where he's shown that it's corrosion-derived cobalt, 1 part per billion in blood is the high-risk group, whereas metal-on-metals is more like 3 parts per billion. We're seeing this with many popular hip designs that are still commonly implanted. This is a modular chrome cobalt insert similar to what's used in Stryker's dual mobility. In this particular case, it was a modular metal-on-metal. But we're seeing backside corrosion of cobalt chrome implants, and that can make patients sick as well. So this is similar to what you've heard with multiple speakers. We're dealing with periprosthetic consequences of cobalt chrome metallosis, producing inflammation, both a chronic and acute, and the immune consequences are clear. And it's probably about 10% of my patients present with a heavily systemic immune flavor to them, new allergies, new rashes. But almost all my patients are complaining of mental fog and fatigue, very similar to what we're seeing with the Escher ladies. And then the patients with particularly high levels and many years of exposure are getting the hard neurologic findings. So the bottom line here is my threshold for concern in urine is 1 part per billion. That corresponds to a blood level of 0.4 parts per billion. And those were the cutoffs I used to separate my cobalt positive from cobalt negative patients. We're seeing a dose-response effect if we take a look at our cobaltism symptom inventory and divide our urine cobalt years into quartiles. As those numbers go up, you see increasing symptoms. So, blissfully, I got seated an additional 3.5 minutes of time. I would love to be sitting in the front of the room, because I think I could make more of a contribution there, given the work that I've done. I was determined to be too conflicted to be at the front of the room, so I'm speaking from the podium. But since my extra time was ceded to me by an Escher patient, the thing that's striking to me is the commonality of the symptoms that we see with the Escher patients, which is an amalgam of fiber, polyethylene tetraphthalate, nitronol with nickel, gold-containing solder, and these women are desperately ill. And they resemble completely my patients and myself when I had a cobalt chrome metallosis problem. I had problems at the hip. I lost all the tissue around the hip. My histopathology was totally cell necrosis. There wasn't a lymphocyte in the picture. And I have my cobalt symptom inventory. I developed that. I know about that because I suffered 9 out of 10 of the symptoms myself personally. When I applied to be on this panel in 2012, I was denied because I wasn't an expert. And I submitted a written manuscript of 15 revised metal-on-metals with 5 patients that were cobalt neurologically toxic. And you guys shit-canned that study, and nothing was done. You guys allowed industry to pull metal-on-metal hips silently off the market. And those metal-on-metal hip patients that are not recalled are now coming into my office seriously neurologically ill and in heart failure. And it is a public health travesty. The FDA, in my experience with orthopedic implants, is more interested in the health of the arthroprosthetic industry than it is in the health of the patient. And there is unequivocally no doubt in my mind this exists and it is common. And I am just tired of being the guy who has to look under the rock and find it. I mean, for God's sakes, I'm not the Mayo Clinic. I'm a solo practitioner, orthopedic surgeon in Anchorage, Alaska. What does it mean about the system if I'm the one who's discovering this stuff? The FDA is not doing its job. You guys are asleep at the switch. This stuff is happening to hundreds of thousands of Americans, and you're doing nothing. Thank you.